So, welcome everyone to Revolutionary Ideas, the festival of socialism and struggle organized by Socialist Alternative. Sarah, I'm an activist with Socialist Alternative here in Liverpool, and I'll be chairing this opening rally, Fight the Rich, Not Their Wars. But before I get started with some opening remarks, I got an important announcement. The main toilets are unfortunately closed. So if you need the toilet, you'll have to either go to the wave bar or the breakfast rooms, which are all near reception. So with that out of the way, Socialist Alternative is a revolutionary organization fighting to end capitalism, the system that creates exploitation, war, oppression, and environmental destruction across the world. Capitalism is a system that puts the profits of the super rich above the needs of billions, that funds bombs instead of housing, oil companies instead of renewable energy, and police repression instead of healthcare and education. We believe that only a democratic socialist society run by and for working people can end this chaos and build a future based on equality, solidarity, and real freedom. We're proud to be part of International Socialist Alternative, which brings together activists and revolutionaries from across the globe, from the US to Brazil, Nigeria, China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan, Sweden, and many more, all united in the fight against capitalism. Here in Britain, we're also helping to build your party because we believe it's crucial to take on the far right and offer a real alternative for working people. We'll be talking more about that in the closing rally, so you don't want to miss that. But in this discussion, we are going to be talking about all the wars that are sprung across the world. We're living through a period of deep crisis and global conflicts, from the growing rivalry between the US and China, to the ongoing genocide in Gaza, to the civil war in Sudan, and so many others. And we're told it's just the way things are, the way the world works, that there is nothing we can do, but we know these wars are not inevitable. They're not the result of ancient rivalries or random chaos. These aren't isolated tragedies. They are both products of a system that puts profits and power above human life and needs. That's why we're opening the festival with this rally, to discuss how we can build a movement to stop these wars and fight the system that creates them. So let's get started. Our first speaker has come all the way from Germany. She's part of International Socialist Alternative, an activist in the Linke, the left-wing party there, and she'll be talking about state repression of the Palestinian solidarity protest in Germany and beyond. So please give the warmest welcome to Linda.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you all. I'm very happy to be here, to be able to be here. So the movement against the genocide in Gaza has politicized a new generation in many countries, revealing to them the true ugly face of Western imperialism and the so-called Western world values. With the general strikes in Italy, the working class has shown the way forward for the movement. This movement strikes those in power, and rightly so. In Germany, attempts were made from the very beginning to nip any form of solidarity with Gaza in the bud. Compared to other countries, the movement was initially relatively small and politically isolated. The state, capitalist parties, and media mobilized for Israel's war from day one and declared unconditional solidarity with the state of Israel to be an indispensable German so-called reason of state, which has had a profound effect on parts of the left and the trade union bureaucracy. All Palestinian and Lebanese sources, as well as all international organizations and NGOs active in the Middle East together, did not make the headlines of German news even half as often as Israel government and army alone. So any solidarity with Palestine was discredited as anti-Semitic and criminalized. While the far-right AfD continues to grow, rising anti-Semitism is being projected onto Palestinians and people from the Arab world, and this in Germany. Yeah. Demonstrations against the massacre was first completely banned, and then showered with the most ridiculous and absurd restrictions. I myself am from Hamburg, and I was at the first demonstration in Hamburg, which was approved under massive restrictions, but was stopped after 20 minutes. The reason for that was that the absurd requirement that protesters, many of whom are on the streets because they were mourning their relatives and friends, were strictly forbidden from starting chanting slogans during the demonstration. These could only be agreed with the police and initiated by the moderators, and no slogans in Arabic were allowed anyway. The Gaza demonstrations are being used by the police to fundamentally undermine basic democratic rights. In Berlin, police violence has been and continues to be most excessive. There are videos of cops chasing, surrounding and taking away an 11-year-old child carrying a Palestine flag, cops pulling an 18-year-old out of the crowd, beating him unconscious, and then dragging him to the side of the road, or choking a kneeling woman, and so on. There are like a lot of disturbing videos on the internet. Schools in Hamburg initially received official instructions to report students who said "Free Palestine." People were occasionally sacked if they expressed solidarity with Palestine, and a new level was reached when 4 activists with EU and US citizenship were even threatened with deportation for actions in solidarity with Palestine, like a university occupation in Berlin. Similar drastic repression has also occurred in the US, and I'm sure I don't need to spend much time explaining the role of the British Parliament to you, which, among other things, has classified Palestine Action as a terrorist group and banned it. So, but why is the repression so massive? Germany's strategic positioning alongside the US-led imperialist bloc and external armament and militarization require ideological armament and repression at home. The mantra of the so-called good West and versus the evil East, I cannot do this, but goes hand in hand with agitation against people from the Arab world and people of Muslim faith. The ruling class is not concerned with the fight against anti-Semitism or human rights, but with their sales markets, raw materials, and geostrategic power claims. To this end, the German state will stop at nothing and continues to downplay the extent of Israel's war terror to this day. The repression of Gaza protests should be a warning to the entire labor movement. In times of nationalism and militarism, the repressive state is expanded. Their repression could not break the morale of the activists, especially young people and migrants in Germany. With the increasing brutality of the genocide, the mood among the population also shifted. While individual sections of the left party were involved in the protests from the very beginning, the leadership initially ducked away completely. However, the mood within the party has changed with the influx of tens of thousands new younger members, and SAV is one of the forces that has helped build pressure on the party as a whole to take action, organizing local solidarity protests and meetings of Die Linke. And at the end of September, at last, the largest demonstration in Germany to date was organized in solidarity with Gaza. Many buses to Berlin were organized by Die Linke. Around 100,000 people gathered in Berlin, which was like, a lot more than before, for a clearly left and anti-capitalist demonstration with the huge drop from Die Linke of 10 to 20,000 people. You couldn't really know, it was so many. And it was probably the most red flags I've ever seen on a single demonstration. It was a really motivating demonstration and a really radical demonstration. But obviously we say this demonstration can only be the first step. It's not enough. Italy shows us the way. We know it's not like the next step, but we should build to this. A united movement of protests and general strikes across Europe and the Middle East could stop this genocide. For freedom and peace in the long term, it is necessary to wage the justified struggle for liberation as a class struggle with a socialist strategy. For an independent, socialist, democratic Palestine, and for the struggle for socialism in Israel and throughout the region. For the security guarantees and equal rights for all nationalities and minorities, for an end to imperialist interference in the region. The ISA is building a revolutionary socialist force internationally. The ruling class is organized internationally, and so must we to overthrow this rotten system. I would like to encourage all those who are not yet members of the ISA to consider joining and to have the necessary discussions with the comrades at this event. There's no time to lose, but the workers united will never be defeated, so long live international solidarity. Thank you.
So now we're going to be hearing from Daga from Nigeria. He's also a member of ISA, an activist there, and he's going to be talking about Sudan and other conflicts in Africa, a continent that's been brutally exploited by imperialist powers for generations. Unfortunately, because of racist border controls, Daga couldn't be here in person with us today, but he's kindly recorded a video message for us, so we're going to be playing that now. You can still give him a round of applause, I'm sure. We'll make sure he hears people. We're very excited about it.
Comrades, we bring fraternal and solidarity greetings from comrades in the Nigerian section of the International Socialist Movement to comrades at this year's Revolutionary Idea Festival. We would have loved to be physically present, but this opportunity to make a case for Africa for the need for an anti-war militarism campaign on the basis of the huge atrocities and on the ending enclave of conflict that Africa has become since, the emergence into the modern age. Interestingly, comrades, flag independence in the second half of the 20th century did not translate to any fundamental difference in the lives of the mass of the working people in Africa. Africa has been condemned to a reserve era of continuous mass exploitations of its resources, and through agents of the IMF and World Bank, Africa has continued to be plundered unendingly. And this is the basis of why Africa has suffered unending wars, as competing interests continue to plunge and plunder the resources and wealth of Africa. Sudan has been described as going through one of the largest humanitarian crises. In the same way, Congo has been characterized as going through the deadliest conflict since the World War II. In Congo alone, over 6 million people have been killed on the basis of the war that is going on. In Sudan, as I speak, 12 million people have been displaced, with over 150,000 people killed in the recent war in Sudan. In Nigeria, which suffered in 1967 to 1970, saw 2 million people, killed. As we speak currently, over 350,000 people has been killed on the basis of the Islamic insurgents going on in the north. This is what has created a new rage in all social media platforms in the country, with Trump threatening, to invade the country. But comrades, we must point out the huge contradictions that is taking place over the attempt, and the attempt of Trump to declare what is going on as a religious war. Trump himself is the #1 warmonger worldwide, and it's even extremely funny that he's beating about the bush as a messenger of peace, on the basis of the trade war launched by the Trump regime, all the countries in Europe, in Asia, including Japan and South Korea, have increased the expenditure of world defense. There is a new race of militarism, and Trump is busy expending as much on war, to beat China over, the question of the country that will have more arms than China. And it is in this context that more than ever before, our decision at the Revolutionary Idea Festival to launch an anti-war campaign, not just against all of the war conflicts all everywhere in the world, but to appropriately recognize and understand that capitalism and the capitalist bosses and the international financial institutions, the IMF and the World Bank, are themselves at the heart of the crisis plaguing Africa, plaguing all of our countries, and that to end war, the working class internationally must organize politically to bring an end to all of the capitalist regime worldwide. I want to applaud all of our comrades for this initiative. This is just the first stage. We will continue to raise all of the necessary banners to organize ourselves appropriately under the banner of the International Socialist Alternative. Viva! Viva Africa! Solidarity forever!
Thank you so much to Dagger. We'll make sure we say this to him too, for sending that powerful message of solidarity. Socialist Alternative has been campaigning across the globe, but also here in Liverpool, calling for workers' action to end the genocide in Gaza and to stop all arms sales to Israel. To talk more about the role that workers can play, we have Louise. She's a teacher, a militant trade unionist, a leading member of the NEU. She'll be speaking on personal capacity, so please give her the warmest welcome.
Over the past couple of years, we've seen some of the biggest protest movements in a generation. Millions of ordinary people across the world against the genocide in Gaza. Those protests have been inspiring and necessary, but if we've learned anything from history, it's that protest alone isn't enough. Marching shows our anger, but to win, we have to use the power that really makes society run. The power of organised workers. The working class creates all the wealth in society. Yeah, and that's because nothing moves, nothing gets produced, no profits are made without us. When we withhold our labour, the world stops. And that's exactly the power we need to use against those who wage a profit from war. War doesn't just happen from war doesn't just happen somewhere over there. It's built, transported, funded, and maintained right here in the factories that make weapons, in the docks where they're shipped, in the offices where deals are signed. Everything in that chain depends on workers. That means we can break it. We've already seen glimpses of the power. Dock workers in Spain, Belgium and France have refused to load or unload ships carrying arms bound for Israel. They've shown more courage and more leadership than the so-called world leaders who claim to support peace while fueling genocide. And when the global Samand flotilla to Gaza was blocked and bordered by the Israeli state, many of those same governments who made big statements about supporting humanitarian aid were suddenly nowhere to be seen. They left activists and aid workers to face a full force of repression alone. That movement showed again that we can place no faith in capitalist states to end war. But workers responded in Spain, and particularly in Italy. Trade unions called strike action against the genocide in Gaza. Italian workers shut down ports and transport links, declaring that their labour would not be used to fuel imperialist slaughter. That was a huge and historic step, and it points the way forward. What we need now is to build on that, to spread that spirit of resistance across Europe, across the Middle East and across the world. We need a coordinated international working class movement that doesn't just demand a ceasefire but fights to bring down the government and capitalist system that makes these wars inevitable. Because let's be clear, capitalism breeds war. It depends on exploitation and division. It thrives on racism, borders and profits from destruction. Whether it's Gaza, Ukraine, Sudan or any other country in the world, the system is the same and so is our enemy. And the lesson from history is also clear. World War I didn't end because the generals grew conscious. It ended because workers and soldiers in Russia rose up, took power, began to build a socialist society. That revolution terrified the ruling class everywhere and it brought the slaughter to an end. Today we need the same revolution and courage, not just to stop the war, but to end the system that makes war inevitable, to replace imperialist capitalism with a socialist world based on cooperation, equality and peace. So let's turn the anger to rebuild into organisation. Let's take that energy from the streets into the workplaces, the unions and the communities. Let's connect every strike, every protest, every act of solidarity into one movement of workers determined to change the world. Because when workers unite across borders, across sectors, across struggles, we have the power not only to stop the bombs, but to build a future that is free of them. So thank you, comrades.
Thank you so much, Luis, for that important message about like the power that we have as workers to not just end wars but transform society as well. As Daka said in his video, Trump is the #1 warmongering in the world. And to talk more about Trump, but also the mass resistance against him from protests to the recent election of Zoran Mandani as the mayor of New York, we'll have Andy, so please welcome him.
Comrades, if we believed in Donald Trump's fantasies as much as he himself does, then we would be in a wonderful world where peace would reign under a new era of Pax Americana. Rainbows will be 24/7, and puppy dogs will be given out for free. Of course, that's about as realistic as Donald Trump's campaign promises were, at least under this system, right? He has inaugurated a new era, but exactly the opposite of what he promised. And that is something that Socialist Alternative and our international ISA warned of at the time of his campaign and his election. That this man was not a peacemaker. He was not going to deliver on everything that he said, but he was a political opportunist that was using every opportunity, every buzzword, every contradictory statement he made against himself to try and assure his own ascent to power. And that actually his agenda in power would be the opposite of what he's promised in the terms of war and international policy. Instead of harking back to the days of so-called U.S. isolationism in the early 20th century, he's neither made peace in existing areas, but actually extended wars and threatened to make wars in new places. His ascension to the throne of the U.S. empire has made an even more decisive shift towards militarism and war in the U.S. and globally. Now, it's not just up to him. It's the period that we're living in. But Donald Trump is acting as a catalyst in giving this new era a significant push towards destruction. This tin pot dictator has not only ended wars, he's extended them, as I said earlier. He's continued to arm and support the imperialist proxy conflict in Ukraine, merely requiring that the European capitalist powers shoulder more of the debt and the burden for this conflict. He's continued to be best friends of the genocidal right-wing regime in capitalist Israel. And in both cases presented so-called peace plans that have only increased the leeching of Trump and his cronies through the situation. Looking into these so-called peace plans, we see that one of the big things and one of the big tenets is not actually peace, but a looting of Gaza, Ukraine, and elsewhere by U.S. private mega corporations. The potential netting of billions of dollars of handouts to the same companies who made a mint on the blood of workers and the oppressed in Iraq and Afghanistan. And those billions then flowing through U.S. financial institutions. And in the case of Gaza, we all know the dystopian vision he's put forward, turning a mass graveyard, a site of genocide, into a Las Vegas-style tourist destination headed by none other than our own Tony Blair. And in addition to that monstrosity, those horrors, those monstrosities, he's on the verge of starting new wars with threats against Nigeria, as Comrade Daga talked about in the video, and of course the threats against Venezuela, where their very thinly masked attempts at regime change are resulting in ships being parked off the coast and forward operating bases in Colombia and soon to be Ecuador for U.S. imperialism. And now we have the risk of all of those conflicts because of the world situation escalating into proxy conflicts between different imperialist powers. For example, in Venezuela, I just read today that not only are the U.S. off the coast, but now Russia has just sent missile defense systems to Venezuela to defend itself against U.S. imperialism, which inevitably would escalate the conflict well beyond the confines of Venezuela. And I don't have time, but it's worth mentioning what Daga said about Sudan, which is an ongoing bloody massacre, not just on the side of the RSF. We should have no truck and belief that the Sudanese army will actually bring liberation, but all of those things being funded by world imperialism, either directly or indirectly through its proxies. And now Donald Trump has also declared war at home on the working class and the poor of the United States, not just economically, where he's laid off tens of thousands of unionized federal workers, effectively stripping them of any sort of union or collective bargaining rights, and now is using the government shutdown to declare a war on the poor, cutting benefits and social programs, but also militarily, turning ICE and the Border Patrol into his personal paramilitary organizations, effectively invading and occupying major U.S. cities, which has very little to do with immigration at all. Don't take it what he said at face value. But is to physically and psychologically terrorize what he sees as the hubs of left-leaning ideology amongst workers and youth in the cities. And this is despite clashing with sections of his own ruling class at times, who are willing to bend the knee to have some stability in their eyes from this madman. He's carrying out what they themselves could not. An iron heel to carry out vengeance against Black Lives Matter, a resurgent labor movement, and years of mass protests. U.S. imperialism under Trump no longer operates the Department of Defense, as it has been called for decades upon decades, but in a naked admission of what they're all about, something that you very rarely get from U.S. imperialism, has renamed it the Department of War, and has taken its war machine to the next level. The U.S. military budget is now at its largest level in history. Almost $900 billion are being spent for fiscal year 2025. This is largely aimed at upgrading its arsenal and its production capacities after the experience of arming the Ukraine conflict has shown that they are not up to snuff when they think a new global war might develop. It's expanding its bases abroad in the South Pacific, as many may know, but also in Latin America, as I mentioned earlier, in Colombia, but also using an upcoming referendum in Ecuador to open up new military bases in South America. There's also been a massive investment in military recruitment, which had hit record lows in the last years, with over $6 billion being pumped into recruitment ads alone over the last 3 years. Trump is declaring war on the world, including the working class and the poor at home, and it's no wonder that all of this goes together. And of course the question comes to our mind, where is the resistance? Well, it is there. We saw the biggest single day of protest in American history just a few weeks ago with the No Kings protest. You may have seen also on social media, despite the occupation and invasion of U.S. cities by these paramilitary ICE and Border Patrol forces, that workers and young people around the country are fighting back with protests, even tailing ICE and setting up alert networks in their neighborhoods to keep their neighbors safe. And of course, earlier this week, we saw the potential in the election of Zoran Mamdani, a self-described democratic socialist, elected on a pro-worker program by almost 1 million people in New York City, taking on not just the political establishment in his own party, but also the billionaire class who lined up with tens of millions behind Andrew Cuomo and Curtis Sliwa, his opponents. So clearly, these things indicate that there is combustible material for a mass resistance to take down Trump in the United States. But a decisive thing has been the lack of leadership and organization. The working class has not brought forth its true power, as Luis has outlined, for instance, in Italy, in reference to the Gaza war, as organized collective action as a class, and its ability to shut things down, that it can mobilize against this. And a major point of that has been the fault of the so-called labor leadership, which is in general either cowered before Trump, making backroom deals with him, as in the leader of the Teamsters, Sean O'Brien, who's become a very vocal supporter of Trump, disgracefully, or abandoned any sort of idea of working class mobilization to kind of outsource their struggle to the spineless and worthless leadership of the capitalist Democratic Party. It means more than ever then that we need a campaign and politics that speak to the need for an anti-war, anti-imperialist alternative to this. The heart of that is the need for an organized and independent working class movement that needs to stand on its own 2 feet, organize, strike, and take political representation and organization of its own, not to be willingly rustled into behind the Democratic Party in next year's midterm elections. It poses the question, as it does here in a different way, of a new party for the working class, for young people, that can actually not only take up the resistance to Donald Trump and the Trumpified Republicans in the elections, but also resist the Democratic Party, organize independently in elections, but also on the ground, become a hub of organizing and campaigning for the working class, helping lead strikes, campaigns, anti-ICE movements, and so on. But ultimately, as I think as other comrades have spoken to here, to both challenge Trump at home and to challenge U.S. imperialism and militarism abroad, there needs to be a movement not against just war, not just against imperialism, not even just against the 2 main capitalist parties in the United States, the Republicans and the Democrats, but against the very system on which those things operate and proliferate their existence, against the system of capitalism. And I think, as Louise pointed to, the question of war is one of the central questions for the working class since time immemorial, and it is not secret, I can't think of the word right now, it's not a shock that if we look back in history, the first time that the working class seized and held on to power in its own name in Russia in the early 20th century, war was one of the catalysts, because it brings into sharp relief everything wrong about the system, the starvation, the famine. We see that in Sudan. The mass killing, we see that everywhere, unfortunately. All of these things, it is capitalism in a nutshell, putting workers and the poor against workers and the poor on behalf of people in boardrooms somewhere far the fuck away. And in order to defeat it, we need a movement against its source. And so I echo the calls the comrades have put forward here from different countries, from different continents, Africa, Europe, well, the United States, even though I live here now. But it makes the point that this has to be an international struggle against capitalism, against imperialism, against war, but ultimately with a socialist solution, with the working class at its heart, and with an alternative system, a revolutionary transformation of society where the workers exercise democratic control and management over the resources to end conflict forever. And that's what we're fighting for in Socialist Alternative in the United States. That's what we're doing for here, Germany, Africa, Nigeria specifically. That's what we're doing as International Socialist Alternative. So I hope you join us in that.
We have Matt from Base Please. This week we've seen yet another failed COP conference, the UN Climate Summit, proving once again that world leaders can't solve the crisis created by their own system. So climate change is one of the greatest threats facing humanity, and it's also driving more conflict and war. To talk more about that connection, please welcome Matt and give him again a round of applause.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks for everyone coming here today. COP is largely irrelevance now. We've had 30 of them and not one thing has changed. We've all seen a ramping up of climate change, so I'm not going to talk about COP. Instead, I'm going to talk about the wars that are raging on and causing further damage to the climate. So there's wars raging on in Ukraine, Gaza, Sudan, Congo and elsewhere. The world's attention is rightly fixed on the horror, the bombs, the massacres, the mass displacement of innocent people. But behind the noise of gunfire and bombs, another unintentional war is being waged against nature, against biodiversity, against the very planet that we depend on. War is one of the most destructive forces ever unleashed on Earth, and not only for those in its path. Every war is a carbon catastrophe, a weapon aimed directly at the environment. From the fossil fuel tanks, jets and warships, to the vast military industrial complexes that produce them, war spews out greenhouse gases and pollution on a staggering scale. Every bullet, every drone, every missile, and every reconstruction project is soaked in oil and profits for the arms dealers and financiers. Every stage of war, from preparation to production, combat, and rebuilding, leaves behind an indelible carbon footprint. And who pays the price? It's not the generals, it's certainly not the billionaires, it's working class people and the planet. Take the war in Ukraine. According to the Initiative on Greenhouse Gas Accounting of War, the conflict has produced over 230 million tonnes of CO2 equivalent in just 3 years. That's more than the combined annual emissions of Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway and Sweden combined. Oil depots burning, gas pipelines exploding, power stations destroyed. Each of these releases gases so potent that their effects will haunt us for decades. One of these gases, sulfur hexafluoride, or SO6, used in electrical transformers, has a global warming potential 25,000 times greater than CO2. When infrastructure containing SF6 is bombed, the environmental devastation is irreversible. And then there's methane, released in massive quantities from sabotaged gas pipelines. The Nord Stream explosions alone released tens of millions of tonnes of CO2 equivalent. Wars also spark wildfires, particularly in frontline zones where firefighters can't reach. Forests burn, diversity is destroyed, and carbon emissions soar. The planet suffocates while the arms corporations count their profits. And it doesn't stop at the front lines. The war in Ukraine triggered an energy panic across Europe. Instead of breaking with fossil fuels, capitalist governments scrambled to open new gas fields in the North Sea and reignite coal plants. They use war as an excuse to deepen our dependence on the very industries driving climate breakdown. In this era of war and crisis, climate change has been pushed further down the list of priorities by a ruling class concerned above all by the short-term interests of profit and national competition. Because under capitalism, the only priority is profit. Not people, not the planet. The ruling class sees nature as a resource to plunder and workers as tools to exploit. Capitalism has become nothing short of an existential threat to humanity and the planet. As global temperatures rise to unlivable levels, vast regions of Africa, Asia and Latin America will become uninhabited. Millions will be forced to migrate simply to survive. And the far right will seize on this suffering to try and divide us even further. These wars These trade rivalries, these massive military budgets, they're not about freedom, they're not about democracy. They are imperialist wars fought to defend the profits and power of the capitalist elite. The ruling class turns working class people against one another, sending us to kill and die in wars that serve their interests, not ours. We, the workers, pay the price in blood, in poverty, and in a dying planet. Ending imperialism and building a socialist world depends instead on the cooperation and unity of the international working class, as Linda mentioned. First in its struggle against the ruling elite, and then in the construction of a worldwide planned economy that puts need and the planet before the profit of a few. That's why we're revolutionary socialists, that's what we're building, and that's why you should join Socialist Alternative.